track record in digital. He will be chairing our Finance and Performance Subcommittee of the board. So we're strengthening our board, you can see this, around the digital finance strategic piece. We recognised that was something we needed to, where we needed to develop our strength. And finally, the fifth thing to draw to your attention took place at the very beginning of November, and that was the formal launch of IRIS. Some of us know exactly what IRIS means, and to others that might sound mysterious. But IRIS is our Improvement, Research and Innovation grouping for the whole of our ICS, led by Dr. Jacqueline Andrews from Harrogate and District Foundation Trust. It's the home of all those things around innovation, improvement and research. And again, Stephen might like to say a little bit more about that. And then my final comment is around culture change, actually. I had to write a report for the board on the year, so kind of a chair's roundup of the year. And I think what I feel to be our greatest achievement, and you can also be the judge of this, I think people are genuinely, across our system, thinking system first. I think people believe in that. People can see the value in that. And I think we've really moved the thinking forward and the way people behave and think over the course of the last year around the system. And I think because people understand that, because people can see how that works, my sense is there is an ever stronger desire in this geography to work more closely in partnership. So I've shared with you the 5 things which have been important over the last quarter, and then a couple of thoughts really about what it is we've achieved over the course of the year. But I will defer to Stephen, just in case there's something he thinks would be useful to share at this point.
I don't think I want to say a great deal, Chair, because you've covered the ground there, and obviously we've got a busy agenda. I think the thing I'd want to focus on just briefly reflects the discussion we had in our integrated board meeting last week, is that the summation of all of that leads us to another round of change as we move into 24-25. I mean, that's predicated on the back of the huge challenge on the horizon, the immediate horizon for all public services, actually not just the NHS. So a few things to say about that. So just I use the term managing today and managing tomorrow quite a lot, because with the collective of people we have around this table, and indeed around other tables that have met today and elsewhere, we've got by far a significant capacity, I think, to hold those two things together. Sometimes it's challenging, but my point would be, unless the ICP and the ICB and its constituent parts across the system hold on to that future and design it, then we'll never move out of today. And we all know that today is it's not how we want it to be. So I just want to make that general point. The reason I do that is because in my own mind 6 months ago I would have said, well, we've probably gotten the sort of changes that we might need to put in place to enable that, and I'll say something about it in a second. We've probably got until about April 25 to do that. Well, I don't think that anymore. I think we're into a conversation and a series of actions that accelerate that broader agenda. So, in a nutshell, we're not changing the strategic direction of the ICS, which has been built over time, but we're resetting it. And more of that, I think, in the early part of the new year, Chair. But what we also want to do alongside that is really accelerate what I'd call, in general terms, accelerate letting go. So bearing in mind we've built a new organisation over 18 months by effectively bringing together a series of other organisations with very little preparation and very, very quickly. I think we now understand exactly where we're trying to get to strategically and operationally. So letting go means that we want to empower even further our 6 places. And some of our debate over the next few weeks will be about doing that, so we can take some further significant steps to make that happen from April next year. At the same time, we have collaboratives of providers. I don't like to talk about providers because commissioners and providers is a bit of old language, really. We're all one system. But when you say that, it's a bit amorphous. But we do have a collaborative in acute primary care, community and social care, voluntary sector, and their focus is really about what makes sense to do together once across this geography of 1.7 million people. We want to give them more authority and power and responsibility to do that, and therefore the real dynamics of delivery, for want of a better phrase, is how do those two elements, a much more empowered local decision-making place environment alongside that collaborative set of changes I'm talking about, how does that function then to more rapidly put in place some of the big changes we're facing to respond to our quality, efficiency, productivity and broader strategic challenges. And the final point I'll make is anybody working in ICS land that thinks this is about the NHS is in the wrong country. And now the thing is, unfortunately, because of the way the things are, and none of this is about underestimating or undervaluing what we need to do today for people on waiting lists and so on and so forth. That's a job we have to do. But around these tables, it's really how do we interface the NHS as a partner, and particularly at place, but also on the bigger scale, with those that can enable us to realise those core purposes around socio-economic development, population health, addressing inequalities, because none of the aspirations we have can be delivered without that genuine, meaningful set of partnerships. I extend that, by the way, to universities and local business, and the route into those is not necessarily directly through the NHS all of the time. So I don't really want to say much more than that at this point, other than to emphasise that that's keeping us true to the principles that we started with, Chair, but I think we're going to move a lot more quickly over the next few months to try and realise some of the benefits earlier than we thought we might be able to. I'll leave it at that. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much indeed. Thanks, Sue, and thanks, Stephen. Any comments or any questions from anybody around the room? Joe, I will say to you on the screen, you are a huge presence to us all in the room at the moment as you fill the screen. But so just wave if you need any attention. But any comments on that? No. Okay. In that case, I shall move on to local government partnership review. And first of all, can I start by saying one of the, in my mind, and I'm speaking. My colleagues from local government and fellow councillors around the table will have an opportunity to speak in a minute or two. But I think it's a refreshing change with the new systems approach over the last 18 months, probably 2 years, that we do have, I think, a much more positive contribution around the table and the opportunity to actually contribute more than we probably feel we had in the old days of CCGs, etc. So I'm hoping that continues, because what I don't want to go is move backwards in that sort of involvement that we now have, I think, from local government across the patch. I think the easiest thing I could have done now was to reread the minutes from the last meeting, because I think everything that was said then still pertains at the moment. We have issues with inflation, particularly in social care providers, our own staff within the local authorities, so that is still a huge worry to us. Workforce retention is still an issue, not just in social care, but across the board in local government in many areas. And we do suffer huge recruitment challenges at the moment, and also in recruiting the right calibre of people to fill some of those roles. In my opinion, we are struggling across the board with lots of things in local government at the moment, not just the social care interfaces. And we still have huge unpredictability about future funding. I'll touch a little bit on our local government settlement in a couple of minutes, But of course, the problem is we have a growth in demand that's not in line with our ability in local government to raise local taxes to actually meet that uplift in demand. And as I've said, there's a lack of interest in roles across local government of people coming forward that have the experience. Fortunately, we still have, particularly sitting around this room, experience to work on some of these issues, but I do fear where we're going to be in a couple of years' time. Demographic and population change and the pressures around particularly mental health and dementia, I think, are affecting us very much in local government. And there is probably a criticism, and others may wish to challenge this, that the health service investment in community services, which we're heavily involved in, it probably takes, or appears to take, a bit of a backseat to acute care. There is that perception. It may be changing, but I think it's fair to say, probably from a local government and particularly elected member perspective, that's how it's sometimes seen. We have huge pressures when local government on the children's services side, especially SEND, special educational needs and disabilities, that the costs associated with those for various reasons have absolutely rocketed in the last couple of years and are continuing to be probably the biggest pressure. We probably understand social care pressures better than we do, but the SEND and children's services costs are just rocketing across the country. And it's a challenge, you know, something has to be done about that, because that's the biggest hole in our budget probably moving forward over the next year. And I think from a population health point of view, and particularly talking to DPH colleagues, the pressures on finances, we are worried that, you know, cost minimalisation, can't even say the word which I've written down, minimisation and survivalist thinking in local authorities means that we have to be careful not to bow to those people that are shouting loudest. You know, is it potholes? Is it other issues? You know, rather than continuing that investment in longer-term solutions to some of the prevention and preventative agendas. And I fear at the moment that those that, you know, shout loudest because they don't want to lack priority in their areas will sometimes get their way, and that's something, particularly we as elected members, with our colleagues that aren't on a day-to-day basis involved in the social care and the NHS and all those connections, got to be careful that they're shouting louder, don't actually take all the funding that is there, what little there is. And we don't want to, particularly with elections coming up, leave everything to the next generation or the next administration. You know, we've got to decide now how we prioritise and invest across the system. And I think with more people living with longer-term chronic issues and health problems, that's also going to grow at a much faster rate than the current system can cope financially, and particularly in local government. Current thinking nationally is not keeping pace with some of the pressures that we're seeing in that area. And I think we've got a huge job to do to make particularly caring for others an attractive and probably a sustainable career for residents to come forward and want to be part of, and there's a job to be done there. In amongst all this, though, my plea, I think, from a local government sector is please, please, please don't let's lose that focus on prevention moving forward. As Stephen said earlier, you know, it's more than just the NHS, it's more than just acute services. It is the prevention agenda, and that's all around the economy. It's about jobs, it's about housing, about roof over people's heads moving forward. And following that then comes better health for people and better outcomes, again, in my opinion. I did want to touch on our local government finance settlement, which was a couple of days ago. I haven't read the small print yet, but once again we're under pressure in local government to use council tax to sort of bolster up the national funding that's coming through from national government. I mean, Michael goes through 6, whatever it is, %, but that's an assumption that we will be increasing council tax in local authorities by the full 5%. I always get it the wrong way around. I think 2% for general services and 3% for adult social care, or vice versa. So once again, the settlement isn't as happy as it seems from national government, because there is an expectation that we'll have to raise quite a bit of money locally, and all the political implications of having to do that year on year as well. And I think I'll almost finish there. I have to touch on something that is of interest across the patch at the moment, because we're all in different stages, the devolution agenda. because as everybody's aware, in North and North East Links and Greater Lincolnshire are looking, they have a deal and they're looking. I'm not sure where you are in the consultation process. I think it started, Stan.
It's just starting, yeah.
Yeah, we in the East Riding tomorrow have an extraordinary general meeting of our council to give the go-ahead to consultation on the proposed deal that's on the table. And I know sort of York and North Yorkshire well down that route at the moment, but it does affect us all. At this moment in time, it doesn't really impinge so much on our relationships with the NHS and healthcare and that side of things, but who knows in years to come where it may lead. But it is taking up a lot of political time and discussion and discourse at the moment, and probably at the expense of some of the more important pressing issues around social care and children's services we've touched on. I think just going back to the funding, but a couple of quotes from the LGA, which is cross-party, the Local Government Association, and a couple of quotes at the moment that 1 in 5 council leaders and chief execs in England think it is very, very or fairly likely that their council will need to issue a Section 114 notice this year or next. But more importantly, in my mind, I think half of the council leaders and chief executives are not confident they will have enough funding to fulfil their legal duties next year, 24-25, and that includes the delivery of statutory services. So that is a big threat, and I know, I mean, looking at local budgeting at the moment, I think there's a lot of use of reserves and sticking plasters to see us through financial plan for the next couple of years, which I think everybody needs to be aware of. Everybody around this table, in different extent, it will impinge on the social care side of things and the services we can offer. So that's really my personal view, actually, where we are at the moment from a local government perspective. Bit of a run through, but there are pressures there, and I think we do have concerns moving forward. But I don't want to lose the progress that's been made so far in our involvement around this table and the ICB, which I think has been exceedingly positive. I'm happy now to get any further comments from Stephen. Sure.
It was just on your point about the settlement, and to reflect, I think Julia and Karen were we had a very, I think, constructive discussion, chief exec discussion last week on a number of fronts. But one of the propositions I think came from local authority colleagues was it would be helpful in the light of what you've just said if we brought the ICB financial position together with a collective conversation about where we are to see what we might be able to do on a system-wide basis. I completely understand this is local and locally determined and all the rest of it, but we all felt it'd be really useful to really understand where we all are and whether there's any sort of collective things that we could do, acknowledging what you've said. And I think that would sensibly come back here when we've done that. So that should be happening in the early part of the new year.
Thank you. No, thanks, Steve. Stan, I'll come to you, and then Joe, I've got you with your hand up as well. So
Okay, thank you. I thought your summing up was eloquent and full, so I don't have a lot to add to that, other than to maybe comment on your early comments about involvement and sharing. And I think that's certainly true, that this is a unique forum. And as local authorities, we feel loved. Which is really great that we feel loved.
Don't go too fast.
Wait a minute. The caveat is, of course, that protect that love, we also have an embryonic Section 75 agreement, which is really important for North East Lincolnshire, potentially also very important for the wider ICB as these are developed. And straight after this meeting, our Cabinet will be approving and discussing that in detail. So that's great, and I think that is a really major step forward for everybody in this room because it lays out in very formal terms how things work going forward. Great stuff. In terms of devolution, just a quick word on Lincolnshire. All 3 local authorities have now, through their full councils, approved the deal, which was ceremonially signed by ministers a couple of weeks ago. And it has gone to public consultation. I can say that in northern Lincolnshire, in Lincolnshire as a whole, I think over the first 2 weeks, there have been about 1,600 responses already, some of which have been provoked by a certain lobby group who are fundamentally opposed to devolution full stop. So we've had all of their supporters come in early on, but even allowing for that, after 2 weeks, it's around about 51% in favour. The strongest adverse comment that's coming back is about the proposition of having an elected mayor. But the reality is, if you don't have an elected mayor, you can't have a level 3 agreement. And if you don't have a level 3 agreement, you can't get all the funds cascading down. So, elected mayor is a prerequisite. And I think my final comment, just perhaps a bit prosaically about Northern Lincolnshire. I attended 2 fairly important events over the last 2 weeks. One on public health and one on drugs and alcohol. And these were Northern Lincolnshire workshops and had a full and really good attendance from people across the piece, from different elements of it. And I can remember as I left the public health one, there was a premise that they wanted to set up, I think it was 8 subgroups with subgroup chairs dealing with specific public health issues. And as I left, because I had to go early to go to another meeting, I said, good luck with that. To my absolute amazement, they've got 8 chairs and they've got 8 groups that are fully established. And so we've agreed at a meeting, a follow-on meeting a couple of days ago, the protocol by which we will receive the reports on these subgroups. But it's really good that we've got that detailed take-up on important public health issues. And we had a very similar follow-up on drugs and alcohol as well. So it's really, really pleasing to see these things beginning to coalesce across the piece. I'm sure there'll be problems going forward, and I'm sure everybody's enthusiasm won't always be as strong as it is today, but it's a really, really good start. And at that, I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thanks very much indeed, Stan. Jo, I'll come to you next. Councillor Coles.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I hope people can hear me, and apologies for not being there in person. I had to travel this morning. I'll just echo those points that have been made around budget setting. So we are also in a challenging position, not yet at the kind of proper crux of it, but it's extremely challenging. And I think the thing I've been saying to health colleagues locally, and I guess I just wanted to take the opportunity to say in this context, is just to be mindful that we are having to make decisions to stop doing things that are not statutory responsibilities of the local authority. And we are doing our very best to not stop doing things which we know have a preventative impact down the line. But that is incredibly difficult when councils, across the area are having to make the reductions in budgets that they are. I would just echo, just different to others, just to say, in York, our challenge is much more with adults services than it is with children's. We are pressured in children's, don't get me wrong, but it's not the growing pressure in the same way as it is with adults. We have a real demographic challenge in the city that is putting huge pressure on adult services, which I think means in particular that those preventative services and the kind of softer community-based services are really important. And also because adults does tend to have a much bigger pressure on acute services, it does mean that we are trying to be very sensitive to changes that might impact on acute services. But, and I'm talking to health colleagues to ensure that we try and do these things collaboratively and we aren't causing unintended consequences in what we're doing. Just the other specific thing I would say, just because of adults and the pressure on acute services that comes through adults, is just whether there is anything else that a wider health partners can help to support around voluntary adult social care. So the kind of carers out in the community who are preventing services further down the line and are also taking pressure off in lots of cases off acute services. So just really a kind of general plea really around acknowledging the role that our unpaid caring workforce is playing, but also just whether there is any more that can be done to support them in order that they don't kind of give up and cause additional pressures on the services that the local authority is providing. But I would absolutely echo what the previous councillor colleagues have said about the pressures we're under, and our willingness to work in partnership with health colleagues, as much as we possibly can, because we know that is how we will make things better, even when things are under pressure. But it is incredibly difficult.
Thanks very much indeed, Jo. And I think one of the beauties of both the NHS and the public health agenda, it probably transcends party politics to a certain extent. I think at the end of the day, most of us are involved in this for the right reasons and the same reasons, And I particularly take on board, Jo, your comments about the use of the voluntary sector, because, that has changed out of all recognition in recent years, and I think it is an area we can build on around the board table, not just this, because of the importance they now play. I mean, they are a profession now, not just a bunch of willing helpers and volunteers. So, yeah, I think we can take that on board. I'm going to look to sort of Linda or Michael to see if you have anything you'd like to add to the discussions. No?
No, just that we're feeling the same process as everybody else.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. So I don't know if anybody has anything else they'd like to add, or you're okay, Chair?
Good, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Oh, sorry. Yes. Sarah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I suppose I just wanted to echo really I suppose tying together the comments that we've heard over the last two items, and in respect of the position that we find ourselves in as a system. And I think if I reflect on some of the conversations that we've had within York across the political leadership and the officers across the local government and health, I think sometimes it's not the good times that spur us on to be innovative and to really do something different and radical. Actually, sometimes it's the staring the really sharp end of the challenges in the face, and actually what that does is really galvanise the political leadership, the officers in a local place to really take the baton, really, I think, and run with it in terms of what place can really deliver for the communities. So I just wanted to reassure, really, to say that actually, whilst this is feeling incredibly challenging, I do think almost in the space of 72 hours or so, the conversations that are taking place, it feels like a different conversation. And I think over the next 3 to 4 weeks, we'll see us coming back with a new offer, I think, in terms of what place can deliver, and probably a new ask, I think, as well, of the ICB and the ICP. So just wanted to share and echo my colleagues' thoughts on that.
Thank you very much. I think it's for the first time in my life, I think, as both a councillor and a politician, I understand what place means to us around this table, because it's a difficult one to define. So at least I think we're all clear in our 6 places and how they interrelate. So that's maybe a step in the right direction over the months. So thank you for that. If we have no further comments, I'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Futures Group report. And Charlie, over to you. Charlie Jeffrey, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Chair. Interesting reflecting on that discussion about difficult financial circumstances, stretching across local authorities and indeed the NHS. And I think that underlines the need for partnership and shared action, because there are resources that exist in a range of organisations which can be brought to bear if we organise them well to tackle shared problems. And that's essentially what the Futures Group has been trying to do by connecting across NHS and its conventional partners, local authorities, voluntary sector, patient organisations, and extending that outward to include universities, businesses in the region and others. At the last ICP, Phil Metham gave an update on the work that we have been doing in scoping out an integrated data-led approach to mitigating and indeed preventing population health inequalities, with an awful lot of inspiration from the various projects in Bradford, which now here under the heading Connected Bradford. So broadly exploring how we might do something similar across this ICS region. Since then, we've had a number of workshops to try and develop further what that might be. One of them including, I think, half of the place directors. So being really careful to understand the local dimension of what that integrated data-led approach might need to be. We discussed at our meeting this morning a framework for a proposal that will come through to the ICB and will be discussed at the next ICP in the spring. And I just wanted to pick out a few key phrases from that proposal, which I think capture the purpose and the ambition. The first is a statement of deficit, and that is, I quote, "Our inability to share information acts as a major barrier to planning and delivering integrated care." In other words, despite collaborations of various kinds, we still work too much in sector-based silos. So the ambition is to establish this ICS as a, I quote, "national trailblazing site for the application of data science to public service delivery." So harnessing large-scale data sets from health, from education, from other policy domains in ways enabled by new technologies to scale up our capacity to act, to mitigate and prevent the emergence of population health inequalities. And this will happen through, another quote, "routine data linkage done in a transparent, co-produced and ethical manner." So the data linkage, health at the very heart of both birth cohort approach, education, social care, policing, other local authority derived information, the power of which in combination helps to mitigate some of those silos. Doing that in a transparent and ethical way. Ethical, I think, sort of stands by itself. Transparent, making sure that those who stand to benefit from the use of that data understand what is happening and give their consent for it. And that points to the point about co-production. This is not a paternalistic approach. This is something that needs to be co-designed by the individuals and communities that can benefit from it, which takes us to my fourth quote. "Localities will vary in the issues they prioritise." In other words, the challenges that might be addressed through an integrated data approach are going to be different from place to place. And one is not going to successfully address those challenges without the mobilisation of the institutional framework in the ICS, that is the place element, and the people and communities that can be reached directly through those mechanisms. So in summary, what we're proposing is a shared data infrastructure, an ICS-wide data infrastructure connecting across public service domains, an agreed and a robust process for gaining insight from that data, and one of the things that will require is a greater data analytics capability than we currently have. All of this to enable both system-wide and local actions which are co-produced with and for communities and which have the potential to produce interventions which have effect across the life course. In other words, early intervention in childhood and early years to mitigate the things that manifest in later life as inequalities which impact on the individuals concerned, on social cohesion, on economic productivity, and going to the point that we've been discussing, the cost of delivery of public services, which is a pressing issue in financially straitened times. So that's the ambition, really. It's to enhance individual life chances, to improve social cohesion, to enable the emergence of a more productive workforce, and to reduce in a sense, the unit cost of delivery of public services. And we're moving beyond that after very fruitful discussions this morning towards that proposal to to the ICB and P in the spring. Two important steps in that. One, there's going to be some fairly intensive engagement building on that workshop we had last month with place directors and other key actors in places, in particular directors of children's services. But we're also looking to establish what we're currently calling a national reference group of people with influence who may be able to help in establishing this approach, but also in due course if we're going to be a trailblazer in promulgating this approach elsewhere. Now that includes people provisionally like Anne Longfield, the former Children's Commissioner, Matthew Taylor, the Chief Exec of the NHS Confederation, Andrew Morris, the Chief Executive of Health Data Research UK, Camilla Kingdon, the Secretary General of the Royal College of Paediatrics and Public Health, and others of that ilk. Now, they're people I've spoken with, and they're hugely enthusiastic about this and have said that they will lend us their support. So that's broadly where we are. So by the next time we meet, we hope we have got a fully worked through proposal and a timescale and a sense of how we will draw on the resources of the partnership to make this possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I sort of picked up a couple of points. That first of all, we're talking about the sharing of resources, because I think as we work more closely together, we suddenly realise in each, we have 6 local authorities that have a pool of talent within them in a whole range of areas, from communications to data to IT. And it's nice to hear now that we're thinking of pulling those resources together, because it's the only way to move forward. I think it's a step change, and if you drop these names off the tip of your tongue of these people that will be interested, I think it's fascinating, because without those almost academic connections, we couldn't really expect to have those people working with us to local level, which I think is superb. But also alongside that, the early years, those that are involved in it, and I know in children's services, have known for years and years about the importance, particularly even in pre-birth and those first literally few months and years. And totally separately, locally, we're looking at it through scrutiny. Regionally, I chair a steering group of what's called Minding the Gap, which is looking at health inequalities, supported by Director of Public Health across the whole region. They are wanting to focus on those early years and have speakers as well. So from different directions now, there's a focus coming together, almost a little spotlight on this. So I think that's, from my point of view, really good news moving forward. And again, it's nice having this outside look at the system and, getting that expertise being brought in, because as a councillor over the years, I think we've never really tapped properly into academia and the world and the resources that are there. We've done it in small projects, in Hull or with York, but having it as more mainstream in our thinking, I think is a really positive way forward. So any questions for Charlie about that, or any other issues on working for the futures? No? So I don't know, Stephen or Sue, anything you'd like to add from your perspectives? Because I know you've been involved in moving these things forward. Only to say that
this was only not even a year ago. This was our dream, wasn't it? We met between Christmas and New Year last year. We understood and knew that we had to find a way to work between, the urgent and the important, the here and now and the tomorrow. And this group was very much Stephen's brainchild, but part of our discussions about how could we go on and develop the IC, our system over the course of the year ahead. So it's extraordinary that less than maybe about 15 days, less than a year since we've come this far. It really is a great achievement. We're very pleased.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, well, thank you for that. And we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, Chief Operating Officer Police Report. Alex, can we turn to you for this?
Thank you very much, Chair. So I'll just pull some of the key issues in the report. So obviously the 6 places across the integrated care system provide leadership, particularly focusing around system delivery and transformation, focusing on the today but also the tomorrow, and how we can further shape and deliver the outcomes that we want to deliver in terms of improving outcomes and improving performance. And then around integration and effective use of resources, so how we deliver the whole premium of integration within our places, with the overall outcomes back to our strategy of delivering better health and wellbeing for our populations, focus around health inequalities, and looking at how we use our resources sustainably through the duty of integration. So this report provides an overview of the progress within the partnership and the integration achievements within places and the wider system, and how we work collectively to drive that change through the wider system, as well as innovation and sharing of good practice to make sure we're really capitalising on the opportunities. I've picked some key highlights since the last report in terms of the things that are going on within places to give a flavour. So we've got the York Frailty Advice and Guidance line, which has recently commenced. And we can already see some really good outputs that are being delivered as a result of that. Similarly in East Riding as well, we've got the virtual frailty service operational before winter, again focusing on how we reduce some of the demand and pressures across our system. North Yorkshire have been looking at a new approach to delivering integrated urgent care, and that's been mobilised as well, trying to look at how we focus on improving system resilience. North East Lincolnshire have been doing some work with the Voluntary Sector Fund to look at actions to address health inequalities, and there's a number of projects that sit under that. Hull, we've now got the 60-bedded step-down unit, which has been helping to reduce the pressures within that, and as we've now got building work commenced in North Lincolnshire in terms of the Community Diagnostic Centre, which will put significant additional capacity and also support some of the town centre regeneration agenda. So really great to see the outcomes that have been going on within our places as well. Role of place is now firmly embedded across all of the ICS structures and ways of working, and at the heart of delivering some of the key agendas that we've got across our place as well in terms of supporting that. And there's a strong connection with our local partners right across the piece in terms of our local providers, local authority, voluntary and community sector, and our wider public sector partners as well. We've also been working collectively around a number of core agendas for the integrated care system, including the system approach to integrated urgent care, the discussions that we had this morning around discharge and working with our partners to really support that flow, how we can reduce activity in our front doors as well, and really sharing some of the learning across the system. And then if we focus on things like population health management, we've got integrated neighbourhood team pilots being developed across and looking at the plans for how we spread and really mobilise the potential of understanding our population health needs and how we can improve population, particularly within our most vulnerable communities. Again, just talking about the opportunities around digital and data and how we share some of the knowledge and learning to really focus on health inequalities within our places. And then again, working with our partners around strengthening the local workforce, for example, some of the work that's been going on, looking at market management, market development as well. And then, of course, sharing our learning, particularly around development of centres of excellence within frailty and integrated working as well, and how do we capture that and share that across our broader places. I've also touched on a number of examples around health inequalities and how we focus on that. So building on that population health management approach, and the work that North East Lincolnshire have been doing around shaping their mental health strategy. And then in terms of working with some of our wider partners, work that's going on in North Yorkshire and in other parts of the ICS, working with the fire service to look at the prevention agenda and how we can really mobilise some of the capacity to support that. We've seen a spread of lung health checks into other areas within our ICS patch. Again, supporting that early diagnosis and prevention agenda in terms of cancer. And then some really good work going on in a couple of our places, North Lincolnshire and Hull, around integrated neighbourhood team development and focusing on specific cohorts of our population, such as learning disability, detection of hypertension, and those areas of particular challenge. And then York have been doing some work collectively, looking at their One City plan to look at opportunities for everybody across their population as well. We work very closely with our sector collaboratives to really help support this agenda and make sure that we can use our collective capacity to drive forward this as well. And again, link into the key planning processes. So just in terms of the priorities going forward, the plans are to look at how we continue to build on that strong leadership and really capitalise on the opportunity of shared learning, the premium of integration within our places, and really embed transformation and integration in what we do to make sure that we're maximising our opportunities to support that as well as supporting that key focus on some of our key operational challenges. So delivering our productivity and efficiency programmes, looking at how we support best use of resources, and our core service recovery priorities as well. So that, I think, is the key pieces that I want to pick out, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Alex. Can I ask a question, really? How different are the places in the system? Or how common are they in terms of similar problems? I've no feel for, really. You know.
Yeah, we do a lot of, I thought it was helpful to pull out some of the collective work that we're doing, because each place has got its individual and unique challenges, but there are also great opportunities to share some of the things that we're doing to really try and accelerate how we're doing that. So a lot of the focus of the work that we've been doing is obviously working with our local partners in place to look at our opportunities in the place, but also look at how we make sure that, so for example, the Centre of Excellence are a real opportunity to take something good that's working within a place and look at how we spread that. But there are key partnerships within the places that are absolutely critical to deliver that local agenda. And back to the earlier comments about how do we make sure, particularly in the challenging environment that we're in at the moment, how do we work together to use our resources? So a typical conversation we're having locally in my place is prevention, isn't it? And how do we really maximise our opportunities collectively to drive the whole prevention agenda and manage the demand, because we've got a common purpose across health and across local authority partners to be able to do that. So I think there are differences, but there are shared challenges and opportunities. We come together collectively to look at how we can try and maximise the opportunities around that.
Thanks, Alex, because I get the feeling from conversations I have that, you know, you do all work together quite well as place directors, and that comes through, but I can only ask them, place directors themselves, in that case. I come to Simon next, and then Wendy.
Yes, I think we do work together really well, and there is a lot of commonality. I think the other point, which is probably an obvious one, but also that in each of the places there are different communities and differences. Councillor Owen and I, with the portfolio holder, were talking earlier in the week about coastal services. So in some respects, there's more similarity between Bridlington and Scarborough communities than maybe between Bridlington and, say, Beverley. And similarly, probably for Wendy in North Yorkshire. So there is a lot of similarity, but there are differences, but also there are differences within each of the places as well, which we have to recognise, which are also challenges for us in terms of how we prioritise our resources and work.
Thanks, Simon. Wendy.
So I think in my mind there are three key things. I'm looking at Michael across from me. So there is something around, we've got the Health and Wellbeing Board strategy in places. We've got our NHS sort of delivery plan. We've got, well, there's four things actually. We've got the local government plans, and then we've got the place plan, and those things all need to link together, and they do. I think my sort of absolutely core relationships, and I know other place directors would say the same, so as well as the six of us identifying what needs to be consistent around urgent care, around elective recovery, around cancer, whatever that might be, actually we've all got, I sometimes call it the Holy Trinity, we've all got a relationship with our sort of Director of Public Health and our Director of Adult Services, or sometimes People Director, as they call it in local government. And that's how we make sure that we join up the agendas and we identify where the hotspots are, where the pressures are, and what's the added value of place coming together. Because we've all got the sort of the day job back at the office, but it's where's the added value of us coming together to have that joint conversation. And, you know, so I've just mentioned earlier, for us in North Yorkshire, often that's about the East Coast, and we cut across into East Riding for that, but sometimes it's about service delivery models or pressures in the care market. So I think there are some consistencies, but there are some really core relationships that we'd also describe that join up the agendas.
Thank you. Lots of nods from your colleagues around the table, I think, there, which is nice to see. Stephen.
Yeah, which is all great. I just wanted to sort of, I suppose, build on what I was saying at the beginning a little bit more at this point in the meeting, and reflecting what Joe and Stan and you were saying, Chair. It doesn't matter which part of the system you're in, those really difficult choices you're talking about have got to be made. And in this context of trying to accelerate from an NHS point of view, what the ICB is trying to do. It's trying to get to a place, and I think you use the term, which is a term I often use too, Alex, about are we genuinely, especially in this environment, getting the premium from integration at place? Now, what it means to me might mean something different. And Stan talked about Section 75 to a degree. I think this takes in that direction. But have we genuinely put all the health and care resources on the table under the guidance and governance of the local leadership working in an integrated way to jointly make those decisions? So, and you know, it does lend itself, I think, to maybe local government can't do this. And we've done a little bit of this, I think, Julie, you would agree, in relation to public health in the last 2 years in the ICP. That's what I want to see. That's what I think is a new deal with place, as we move this forward. The thing I also want to add, and I think it's important to add, people have said this already in the conversation today, but we purposely, when we established places, asked the local authority chief execs to be our chief place leaders. I think for sort of fairly obvious reasons. Now, for all sorts of diverse reasons, that works differently in different places. And I think part of the deal is we need to refresh that. So more accountability, more devolved resources. If that's going to be the point of leadership, then, there's a debate to be had about it, but I just wanted to land it here, how does that need to change as well? So, Joe, your chief exec, Ian, was all up for that in conversation the other night. Views are a bit variable in other places. So I just wanted to lay that on the table. Behind all the good things that are going on, I think that's what the next phase actually means. Because unless we can do that, we can't actually let go of all the things we actually want to let go within the framework that we want to establish. So I wasn't suggesting that we debated that at length here, because we will have to come back to that. But that's the discussion we want to have very swiftly after the Christmas break. Thanks.
Chair, if I may just add to that, I think it's really encouraging to hear everything that's been said around this table, but we are at the foothills, I think, of what you're describing, Stephen. There's quite a way to go to get to that true, genuine integration at place that we're all striving for, and all sorts of things that we've talked about here get in the way, don't they? And so I think one of the things that I've been really encouraged about in the discussions we've had over the last few days is how you're now asking places to come forward with what that feels like and looks like for them. So we genuinely collaborate in that conversation about what that new deal feels and looks like for places. I also just wanted to just reiterate that the place directors work together really well. Our directors of children's services, you'll hear from Pauline, also work together across the geography, as do your DASA, the directors of adult social care and directors of public health. So we do have that genuine commitment from key players. I think we've got the right people. We just need to, as you said, rethink that place relationship and how we operate.
Yeah, thanks very much. We touched very quickly, Sue and I had a chat before the meeting saying, in the early days it was great having chief executives in the morning sessions, but in reality their workload and agendas are different. But it's going back right to the start where we said the beauty now is we have got that involvement, particularly local government, around the table at place level. We don't want a perception that that's slipping in any way. We've got to maintain that. And I think a rethink about who is actually sat around that table at an officer level, at a senior level, is very valuable and will be valuable. Stan.
Thank you. Whether underpinned by Section 75 or not, what each place has is a joint committee. And the joint committee is going to be the engine room of integration between health and local authorities right across the region. And I would suggest that the status check in 3 months of how the joint committees are operating would not be amiss, because what we'll pick up then is the commonality or otherwise, yeah, and we can start doing, use the royal we, sorry, but we can start doing some sort of peer group analysis of joint committees and the way that that is working, because there'll be a secretariat for each of those committees. Sure, the chief executive will be chairing, but the way that they work and the outcomes that are achieved from those committees, we need to make sure that as far as possible we're all working in the same direction. So I think a status check in 3 months would be really useful.
And I think also, Stan, the relationship with health and wellbeing boards, so we're avoiding that duplication, how they work together as well, will be good to be reviewed. I think they are going in the right direction, but it does need doing. Yeah, absolutely right. Thank you. See no more raised hands or anybody wishing to speak, so thanks very much. Thanks, Alex, for that update. So we can now move on back to Sue for the NHS Confed report, which I'm sure you're going to say it's only because we're quoted in it. You put it on the agenda. Yes.
Well, it's a useful document, and it's co-produced between the Local Government Association and the Integrated Care Systems Network, part of the NHS Confed. And it's not too lengthy, it's quite punchy, and it's around driving the future vision for health and care. And it is true, on page 18 we're quoted, and the very day we're having today is quoted in that report as being something that others could consider in terms of best use of time. We won't tell them that we're thinking of changing it all over again, but it's rather nice that it's been included in that report, and I thought you might feel a little sense of pride in reading that there, as well as learning about what other integrated care partnerships are doing. So it is there just really for your reference. I'm just going to make a further comment before I hand back to Jonathan. Do you remember we talked about how are we going to compose the agendas for these meetings, and we agreed that we would deep dive into each of our 4 life course objectives: start well, live well, age well and die well. So I'm just reminding you, we've started that today, which is why we're doing start well next, just in case you're wondering. So this is our plan for the year. We'll have a start well, live well, age well, die well session in the course of 2024. This is just the beginning of that process. Jonathan, let me hand back to you.
Okay. Yes, thanks so much, Sue. I think one of the co-authors of that report is Alison Morley, who I've known for a number of years in the LGA. She's supported the Health and Wellbeing Board and a lot of work developing actually health and wellbeing boards in the early days. Yeah. So when I saw her name on the report, it gave me a sense of pleasure, really, because I know she's a very able person, so, and I'm sure the 2 co-authors are, so it was good to see that. Yeah,
good.
Thank you. So yes, having done the introduction for the next item on focusing on start well, then I think we can move straight on to it and over to Pauline, I think. Unless Julia's going to give a bit of an introduction first. No? Thank you.
Okay, obviously I've come here, I think you mentioned Peter Thorpe right at the start, and I come here because one of the first things that he has done, he has come to talk to a number of directors of children's services across the ICS footprint. And I suppose that was the opportunity. I quickly grabbed the opportunity to come along today at Pete's invitation. So I have got some slides. I think they've been circulated, or people have them, or have... Oh, there we go. So I suppose I wanted to sort of introduce you to DCSs. I actually come with some challenges about the opinions of DCSs and the views of DCSs, but I think I also come with the hand of opportunity as well, and hearing a lot of what has been said here already, that has been really useful. And I think that aligns. I was frantically scribbling because the things that people were saying made real sense to some of the points that I'm going to make. So I think there is that room for opportunity, and I suppose it just sort of reflects some of the journey to date, really. So, as I say, I'm a Director of Children's Services in Hull, and the next slide, I don't know who's doing... Okay, thank you. I just wanted to point out who the other DCSs were across the piece. I think there's a real understanding, I suppose this is my first challenge, across this group about who your place directors are. who your directors of public health are, who your directors of adult services are. And I think a lot of you could name who they are across the piece. But in terms of, I think, obviously individual places, I work really closely with Erica and Julia at Place and Tracy, our DAS. But I suppose it's just about that. Collectively, the 6 DCSs across the piece, myself and these 5 colleagues, also work really closely together. We come together, originally we came together as a Humber region, but more recently we have come together across the ICS, but we also come together across the wider Yorkshire and Humber region, across all of the local authorities. But we have widened our Humber group of 4 to include our North Yorkshire colleagues, based on the movement that we've had across and to align to and mirror the ICS arrangements. Stuart in North Yorkshire has a bit of a challenge. I'm not quite sure, is he in 2 or is he in 3 ICB footprints? 3. It is 3. Yeah, so I know that's always a real challenge for him. He's got the biggest geography. But again, he works really hard and aligns best, I would say. I don't know what West Yorkshire or South Yorkshire would say in terms of our regions, but I know that he aligns best and sees a lot of his work fitting in with the North Yorkshire and obviously Humber ICB, because his name's in the title. So I suppose that's what I say. It brings the challenge and the opportunity. I suppose my first challenge is about how well are children's issues talked about when the statutory post holder for children isn't part of your discussions at an ICS level, system level, beyond Place. And I suppose I'll go on and say a little bit more about our responsibilities. So next slide. So obviously the DCS role is a local authority based role. So we work, these are all elements, these are all bits that I haven't made up myself last night when I was preparing the slides. These are all elements that that come from statutory guidance in terms of the DCS's role. So working with partner agencies and organisations, primarily to safeguard children, but in conjunction promoting the welfare of all children in an area. The Director of Children's Services, and we statutorily have to have a lead member of Children's Services. So again, we know we have the chairs of our Health and Wellbeing Board. We know we have a number of councillors with us today. But I suppose where do we bring in, again, lifting the profile of children, because we statutorily have to have a lead member for children. And I suppose I represent the professional body of Children's Services, and obviously the lead member represents that political accountability and responsibility for delivering of our functions. These duties are placed on local authority, and I can't do any of this without the full cooperation of partners across the board. And obviously when we're more or less all of the partners that we work with have a duty to cooperate back with me in the discharge of my roles under the Children Act 2004. And I suppose at place level, I can put my hand, and I know that all of my colleague DCSs will put their hands on the heart and say that's what they do at place. And I suppose for me, it's about how we make those arrangements and how we make this bigger footprint and this opportunity we have at that system level, about how we lift ourselves from the matters that surround children at place and how we lift them to that system approach. And I suppose I want to come on to think about, because our roles are very much wedded to a local approach, but I think there is something about how the system and how we can be part of that system and lift beyond it. I did notice, and I suppose I was sort of came to say how I hear it and how I see it, so forgive me. So I heard about the Holy Trinity. Again, my challenge there is that perhaps there are 4 in that. There might be more, but to me that's a 4. And so if we're thinking the Director of Public Health, Director of Adults, the Place Director, I think there is room at that table for the Director of Children's Services. And I suppose I was really interested in the work that Charlie's doing in terms of mentioning that integration and the avoidance of sector silos. And however we've got to where we have got to, I think there is a real opportunity for now for children to be played in to some of those elements. So the next slide talks about that cooperation and collaboration. So again, working together, which is the guidance that I work under day in and day out, talks about, which recently we had a new version came out last Friday, which I can't say that I've got from the start to the finish of it completely yet, but the same elements still take precedence in there. So yes, that protecting children from maltreatment. However, that preventing, and I've really highlighted this bit, and obviously colleagues here have been talking about it. Jonathan, you mentioned that in terms of that prevention. I've heard prevention mentioned by a lot of people here today. So it's about that preventing impairment of children's mental and physical health or development. And to me, that's the bit in statutory guidance, in working together, that really links the DCS role at place with health colleagues and other colleagues, but also the opportunities that we have at that ICS level. We obviously have that responsibility to ensure that children grow up in circumstances that means that they have safe and effective care. And again, it's enabling all children to have the best outcomes. I think there's a misapprehension that we only work with the most vulnerable, but actually we have that wider responsibility across place to look at all children. So I suppose then, if we go on to the next one, is looking at what the opportunity becomes. We're well placed because we all understand, we've got it round the room, about the opportunity around Start Well. And I think the why in that is that it's morally right to do so. That's what brings me to work every day. We obviously then have the statutory responsibility, wanting to have that ambition and outcomes for all children. And I suppose to me, what the message I really wanted to get across here today was today's children are tomorrow's adults. And when you talk about your today work and your tomorrow work, I'm thinking we have to think about some of the demand that I see in the system that a lot of people are working with, that we've mentioned today about acute challenges, is that I think that is already part and parcel of not really having sufficient focus on children's issues because they are storing up that demand for the future. But actually that's the demand that we're all facing today. And I think there's some room for somehow thinking about how we can collectively look at some of those system issues that happen for children. That I think it was Joe was talking about, I think York online, about that children's aren't that bad because adults are a bit worse, and that's so we focus on the thing that's the worst, and maybe at our peril of not focusing on the thing that's not too bad. But those children then become our adults, and I think that's where some of our focus is now, because that's the reactive approach that we have to the way that we're delivering our services. So I suppose our thoughts, and obviously these are the discussions between DCSs over a while, is some of that reducing duplication. And I think you were saying, Stephen, earlier, a lot of your words are on here, and obviously we have never had a conversation. So yeah, I suppose there is something about that how, and I think that duplications of, I think the ICS what needed to have that understanding of what was happening across all 6 places, and I think very quickly rushed to have some of that really tight grip on what was happening and started to duplicate a lot of things that were already happening at place that you would have been more than welcome to join rather than the duplication. So that's, again, the challenge, and me just saying how it is really. I think then that would actually free up some of the capacity that we have created through duplication to think about things that we really want to address at a system level. And I think that's about how we I don't know that we've taken enough time to build those relationships about working together systemically for children's work. And whilst we might have that at place, I don't think we've done that in the same way that maybe we've had to be forced to, because I see myself as part of an ICS and an ICB, that maybe we've been forced to because of those acute difficulties that we have in adult services. And I heard Sue saying about that growing and strengthening appetite for the system earlier, and that's where I think that's the space I think DCSs really want to walk into. I think we knew the focus would be on adults because of the demand and the acute issues that we have in the system. We needed, I think this is now our opportunity, 18 months in, that we need to come into that space. And I'm hearing that I'm pushing at an open door here. So I was really pleased to hear about some of the resetting of governance or thinking about how we could do some of that differently. And I've called it trusting more to place, being brave about that. And Stephen, you're calling that letting go. And I think that's about the things that we already do well across a place partnership and a place footprint for children. And therefore, to me, the how about that is then escalating and focusing on the commonality of challenge. That's bigger than place, and so that the things that will really bring DCSs together, because honestly, we'll not come together if it's just about talking what we do every day.
No.
We need to come together about the things that collectively we can change, and bringing that thinking and collaboration together. And I suppose then that leads us to that being proactive rather than reactive. And meeting demand, I think that my reflection would be we're always chasing meeting that demand. And that isn't a place in my experience where excellence can thrive. Because you're always doing the acute stuff. You never get to step back and think about what we could do differently. And I think the ICS is the ultimate opportunity for that, because we already do stuff at place. It's about how we can change that all moving forward. And again, some of that has to be about how we focus on the root causes. And to me, root causes are children that grow into adults that create demands on services. And I suppose an element of that is about meeting children's needs closest to home, which is at place. So the second and final slide really is the what. So I suppose it's collectively raising that profile of children and young people as an all-age issue. And so whenever we're talking about, I don't know, I was having a discussion with Karina and Peter about stroke victims. What are we doing for children that are very young in terms of their diet and their lifestyle, that in later life they're already, if we look at the 30-year-olds, the 40-year-olds that are having strokes, what was their early years like? What was their nutrition like? What was their lifestyle like? Their influence of their physical health? How did that then lead to that 30 or 40-year-old having a stroke? And what is the age that we're going to start looking at them things and thinking about that moving forward? As you said earlier, SEND. So if you talk to a group of DCSs, the things that we're all losing sleep about at night is SEND. We have, and I suppose it's about what is, at this very systemic and high level, what do we understand about the SEND needs of our children in the system? York obviously is part of a safety valve movement because of the pressures on the budgets within that local authority. Hull, we're part of one of 75 local authorities up and down the country. We're delivering better value. And that's because of the challenges that we all face because of SEND. Sally's nodding. Sally, I know, is, I think I've been to a number of groups, and primarily I go to the system quality group representing all 6 DCSs on a regular basis. And I never leave that meeting without talking about SEND. And I think Teresa got so sick of hearing me talk about it that I know that investment has been put in about the ICS. And Sally obviously got her baptism of fire in her new post when Hull had its recent inspection of its local area inspection of its SEND activity. And I think there's something more about what do we collectively know about we all know SEND's a real big issue, but actually what is the issue, and do we understand the component parts of that? I think DCSs will also talk up about, for a very small number of children, that the acute system of the step up and the step down arrangements for our tier 4 beds for mental health is a huge issue. And I think that's a big area of commonality. And again, I think there's an opportunity for us there. And I think that broader emotional well-being and mental health issue, obviously I know Gail, she used to work for me in a former life. So there's those elements that I know the ICS has a real interest in, but really have we got the governance right around them, and where have we looked to engage? What is it we're actually really trying to achieve? Because actually that one for me is bigger than even the North Yorkshire and Humber ICS. I think that's a national issue, but like some of the stuff that Charlie's looking at, I think we could be a trailblazer about what is the alternative look. If we really stepped back and thought about, if we were starting from scratch, what would we do differently for children's mental health? And to me, obviously, I can't come here without reflecting some of our corporate parenting responsibilities, and I suppose our offer to collectively, at place we do this really well, but as a system, what is our offer to children in care and care leavers, which constitutes some of our most vulnerable children? And so I suppose they're the things to engage DCSs in some of these discussions. That's what we feel we need to be talking about on a regular basis. That's my pitch, really, but we're here and willing to do it.
Well, I'm knocked out by that. It's fantastic. I was going to say somebody could have written that for me. It was a bit close to it. Could have written it ourselves, couldn't we, Sue, really? I think it's quite organic, actually, looking at where we started today and where we're getting to now, and then you being here, because this is a sort of a, if you like, an early insight into where we're going with our reset, which plays absolute to what you're saying. And I want to talk about some of the mechanics, just very briefly, around what you said. So we do, of course, have this, but people get confused between whether, is this a process? Well, at one level it is a process, but I think we need to be firmly saying, we're focusing on outcomes here, really, and that's part of the point of this conversation, Sue, as it develops throughout the system. Because it's a live course, so it's a process, but actually, what are the outcomes we're seeking placed to what in this context under Start Well? And then the three underpinning sort of, if you like, person-centred approach elements we're talking about is thinking person, thinking family, and thinking community, which reads across to what you say. But the particular thing I want to emphasise is we have, if you counted up the number of goals and objectives the ICP has, it's about 183. It's meaningless, isn't it, really? I mean, at one level. So what we've done is boil that down to 3. And so this is an excerpt from where we're going. It's not fully cooked yet. So the first one is enabling well-being, health, and what we're describing as care equity, which is intended to be capturing more than health inequality, understanding that health inequality is one broader, one part of a much broader piece of work and action we need to do operationally to make the sorts of changes that will improve people's lives. The second one is transforming people's health and care experience and outcomes. And the third one is radically improving children's well-being, health and care. Now, that's not to say children are more important to adults, but I think the point you've made, and in fact Charlie was making, if I've got this right, this intergenerational point is, if you can make him, and others were, Stan was saying, other people were saying this, if you can make an impact early, then the benefits, if we're looking out, which we are, to improve people's lives by 2030, 2035, 2040 on a number of fronts, that's where we need to focus. That's why that's in there. So that's come through our work. What you're saying entirely plays back to that. My last piece is my colleagues in the room who are much closer to this will tell me whether I'm wrong, but my assessment of, this is in the NHS now I'm talking about, it's been fragmented on a system basis. And what we're planning to do is to ensure that we defragment that, bring together a single focus, not to duplicate what you're doing at place, because that, as you say, is working well. Absolutely to address the points you make. I mean, you might want to add things to that checklist, but I can't find any others I would add to your checklist around what we need to address together. So I think that's really all I want to say about it. And I think the action that flows on from that, and you've obviously connected with Teresa, who has an executive lead in the ICB for children, but a lot of that time, I mean, a lot of this is in SEND, isn't it? And some of the quality stuff, there's a lot more in what you're describing there. So in a sense, it's like an anchor right now to what you were talking about into the future. So I think the action from here is we're going in this direction anyway. I think what you're talking about accelerates what the system approach might be like, and I think we just then outside the room, which we'll be able to do, is design what that mechanism looks like to bring you together with all of that, and some of the elements of that are already in place, I think, from a system point of view I'm talking about. And finally, I would say, I know some colleagues down the table have been saying this for ages, for about 2 years, so about the fact that we need to sort of give a similar focus and to have a single system-wide approach. So I think we'll be able to get there very quickly from here. Really helpful stuff. Thank you.
Thanks very much, sir. I'm too old to have light bulb moments, so I've got a bit of a glowing filament after that. You know, yeah.
Sorry, I'll let you go.
Yeah, no, carry on, and I'll come in.
That was brilliant, Pauline. Thank you very much. I just wanted to add to the what, if that's okay. You said you couldn't add to the list, so I think you were alluding.
Loads more, but
yeah,
I'd come with a starter for 10.
No, it's really so. I resonated everything that you said there. I think you alluded to it in the first point, but I would add the physical health needs of children and young people as well. Yeah. There's very strong evidence to link. We have nearly 15,000 children living with 1 to 3 long-term conditions in this ICS, and we know they can be linked to some of the things Pauline talked about in terms of social and emotional health and SEND as well. So I think there is, in terms of that prevention agenda, there is so much we can do, and we need to stop these children dying prematurely. And that start well, live well, age well, die well. It's not necessarily an age thing. For some children and young people, that might be 1 to 10 years old. So I think it's framing it in that way as well. So, yeah. Sorry, but no, great, Pauline. Thank you.
No, thanks. I'm just going to say, I've been a counsellor for quite a lot of years, and when you talked about not being round the table as, director of children's services, it made me think back, and I thought, well, in my time as a counsellor, originally children's services it was all schools education. Oh, and by the way, there's some other social aspects around, children. Then, of course, we've got academies and things change, and the shift has gone away from education particularly. But there was always, and maybe just me, but there's always, children's services were always seen as they did their own thing in their own way in local authorities, and they had national connections, but they were never part of the corporate team because they did their own thing. Now, that's my just interpretation. And immediately sprang to mind, when I was doing my little update on local government, children's services were almost an afterthought, because with the NHS scenario, it's acute services and discharge and social care. So that comes naturally. And I was thinking, in my mind, you have your regional networks of DASs, you have your regional networks of DPHs, and although you work together, it doesn't immediately spring to mind the same. When you talk about, it's not a triangle as well, it is 4 services. And maybe now is the time that we do bring that on board, and it might need a change of thinking, I think, in some maybe elected members' minds, because there's always been this children's services do their own thing. Now, that's only my view. I'm playing devil's advocate. I might be totally wrong, but maybe now is the time. That's that little light bulb moment, that now is the time that, you have parity with the rest of the people around that table. Sorry, that was a ramble, but it made me think back over.
Councillor, do you mind if I come back in on that last point, please? So it's really interesting you say that. So some of the frustrations we've had within the system and the transformation work, and I'm sure colleagues would agree, when we hear about all age, when we look into that, all age means 18 upwards, and it doesn't include children and young people, and I think that's the language we have to change. We've asked the national policy team to stop using that phrase and say children, young people and all age, because what it's doing is children, young people services or provisions are missing out, because the natural thing is to go to all age 18 adults. That's perception, and I think you would agree with that.
I would agree. I think both ends get missed out.
I know we're here to talk about children, but one of my colleagues would say the same about dementia and end of life as well, what we actually usually mean when we say all ages 18 to 65. But I think the other bit for me is also about how we think whole family, which was one of the points you made. We know children, for example, living with parents who have poor mental health themselves or substance misuse issues, have a really much higher risk of poor mental health themselves. But there's a real disconnect quite often. Having come from local authority to health, there's quite a disconnect between, say, children's mental health and adult mental health services, and we are trying to do a lot of work around that transition and join up, but we need those services to be much more collaborative in themselves, the living well and ageing well with the start well, because children don't always have the control. So one should be an indicator for another, not just for social care, but actually for say, CAMS being involved, if we know, without it having to go through a very long process, because we know. And going back to your point about the future, at the moment, 1 in 5 young people under 18 has a probable mental health condition. By 2030, that'll go up by 63%. And we can't cope with the crisis-led model we've currently got. So going back to your point about prevention, we absolutely need to turn that on its head. But with that has to also go the workforce and the funding. Because we talk a lot about prevention, but the first thing that gets cut, and this isn't just in health, I know we all have to find budget restrictions. So this year, our uplift was meant to be £3 million across the ICP for children's mental health, which was going to put a specific focus on health inequalities, vulnerable groups around early intervention and prevention, and that went. So what we've ended up with is a very crisis-led, very expensive, very unsustainable model. So I think if we're going to prevent the 63% increase by 2030, which is getting closer by the day, seeing as it's 2024 next year, we need to back that up with the outcomes, and if things aren't delivering, we need to stop doing them and do what does deliver, rather than just keep doing what we've always done, which will make some organisations uncomfortable, but we're not delivering the outcomes children and young people deserve.
Yes, thank you very much. Any more comments? Anybody?
Joe?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Joe. Yes, you haven't. Yeah.
It's all right.
I should be able to see you.
Yes. I thought my hand was up, but I suddenly realised I either inadvertently took it down or didn't put it up. I just wanted to agree with a lot of what has been said, but also just to add something. So I completely agree with the point about trying to do things differently. And I think, you know, if there was a plus side to having the budget challenges that we have in local government, it's the painful process of reviewing every line of expenditure line by line to work out what you have to carry on doing and what you have to stop doing. But the upside of that is, in some ways, it does make you review what you're doing and what is effective. What would be amazing would be able to do that with a backdrop of also being able to start doing some other stuff that we think would have a real impact. And I think that might be the opportunity of the partnership, is that there are some opportunities to try and innovate and come up with things that we can do collectively that will have those preventative impacts and will kind of try and stop some problems further down the tracks. My kind of point, I guess, was around schools and the challenge of a very fragmented education system that means that we have, you know, some schools being incredibly innovative and proactive around children's health, whether that's the kind of wider public health agenda or whether it's their mental health or whether it's just simple things like having health professionals in school. But that is not currently a uniform offer because the whole system is not a uniform kind of system. It's very fragmented. And so I think there may be a role for the partnership in looking at what the most effective preventative measures would be and how that might be supported. We might need to do that through schools or in partnership with schools as well. So that was just a thought that I had, and we'd had a conversation in York earlier in the week around our school-based offer around health visitors and school-based public health staff. and just how stretched those services now are in terms of the offer that, you know, we're able to make across the city, partly because of budgets, but actually also partly, as we've been saying earlier in the meeting, around recruitment and retention and just keeping staff to do those roles, and whether there's anything, from a partnership perspective around the scales that staff work on, because I know that there is a challenge certainly in York around some health visitor staff will be on NHS contracts and some won't, and therefore that affects the increments that they get on their salaries. So just whether there is anything that is a partnership we could look at around that might help to address a wider problem. I don't know whether it's a problem for other places, but yeah, just to completely agree that, you know, we have to do something for children because they are going to become adults, and I'm particularly worried about mental health and the kind of impact of social media on mental health and what we're storing up for ourselves down the tracks. But yeah, I agree broadly with everything that's been said so far, so thank you.
Thanks very much, Joe. I think it's also, I was going to say, is it about access to schools as well? Because I think there's a lot of variability.
I think it's through place, really.
Yeah, a lot of variability with who goes into schools at what level doing what as well. Yeah.
You and your colleagues would be a good way into some of that.
Yeah, statutory DCS, we have, whilst we do have a multi-academy trust system, Hull is a really good example of that. We have 100 schools and 97 of them are part of a MAT. So that is some learning that I think we can do across the region. I know it's growing across the rest of our region in terms of those numbers. But the DFE, in their wisdom, whilst they give the teaching responsibilities to the schools, there are local authorities, and in my role as the DCS, I still have a number of statutory duties, which means that schools still have to work with me on a number of issues. We have sufficiency issues, we have SEND issues, and the whole SEND service will sit within a local authority, but we obviously work really closely with the schools, and that's a real key duty. So the way into schools is through a DCS, because we hold the statutory responsibilities.
I was going to propose, Chair, a way forward for us on this. I mean, I hate to use the term operating model, but I will, which is, so therefore, when you put together what you have been saying, what other colleagues have been saying, how are we going to operate this system element? I mean, there is clearly a relationship with place, but, I mean, for want of a better phrase, we've got that largely cracked from what you were saying. I mean, others may comment on that. So what's the added value around bringing all of that together from and you set out some of those things, and so did other colleagues, and we should do that on a population health basis, which plays back to some of the things that some of you have been saying about, so, at the end of the day, where do we need to focus our efforts then? There's clearly a mental health dimension, there's clearly other dimensions need to play into that, and so on and so forth. So from a system point of view, which Julia, with your other hat on, plays back to a lot of the work that we're doing from a public health and pop health, broader inequalities point of view. So I think we should take this away to just put together, based on the work that's been done already, based on what you're saying. And then the final thing is, we've got this, Karina, and Nigel's not here, and you made a reference to it. I think there's a big gap for the ICS currently on who's the go-to network with an appropriate leadership model for any particular professional or clinical service. Now, all of that's about provision, so we're not talking about getting involved in that. What I'd like to be able to do is to say, for the sake of the argument, is one of you people here that was taking that leadership role, beyond the executive role, who's carrying that then for the system? So there is a system leader for children. It's not Teresa, not me, but somebody who's actually imbued in, professional in, and we're trying to do that in all the big clinical and professional areas. Now, the reason for that is, not only does that give you a focus for the specific. It deals with the silos because it allows you to bring those people together for the sort of bigger picture and the joining up of those clinical and professional agendas, which actually all need to be tuned into that prevention headline that we were talking about here. So there's a debate about that whole thing for another day, but that's where I think we need to go with, with this children's agenda, based on what you've been saying. And it feels to me we could come back next time with that much more crystallised and pulled together, and it then connects in with some of the things we were discussing and supporting earlier today. Thank you.
We'll go down to that end of the table, and the two of you are vying to speak, so
I'll go first and then she can. We do a good double act, don't we? It was just to pick up on that point, because I think we have already started that journey. I'm not saying it's perfect. So a good example would be the Children and Young People's Mental Health System-wide Steering Group, where we've done that. We've worked with, we've got public health on there, we've got local authority, not at director level, but I'm expecting they feed back to there, so if they don't, we need to pick that up. But what we've tried to do is look at, with our place-based colleagues, our health providers, public health, children's services, and our VCS colleagues, and where appropriate sometimes our university colleagues, what's already happening at place, and we can't do everything. We don't need another huge planet system, but where are those commonalities? So one we're working on at the moment, for example, is transition from children's mental health services to adults. We haven't got that offer right anywhere, totally. And that's where places and partners from place have come together and said, actually, it would make sense to try and do this. Digital access for mental health support was another thing. So that's very much what I'm trying to do, is say, what can we do as a system? And also, where do we learn where somebody's got it right and somebody hasn't? But actually not get into them. So I've seen all the place-based plans for children's mental health. It's not about us replicating, it's where is that benefit of coming together, if that makes sense. And that's what I think we need to build on.
Thanks, Gail. Stephen, I was just going to add in, we've got the New Children and Young People Start Well board at the end of January, which is an attempt to bring these portfolios and programmes together to start that system connectivity. So we have taken a little step, but it will be in development. I'm sure it will grow in what its purpose is and what it's doing.
We've got Karina next, then Julia, and then Sarah. Then I'll go back on.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think Pauline and myself and Pete had quite a long conversation, didn't we, before today, and talking through what we would look to get out of today. I think Pauline put it quite rightly on your slides, that the whole governance piece around this, and it's back to your point, Stephen, I think we really need to absolutely almost upskittle everything that we've got and reset it. Even if we've got new things coming on board, I think we just need to think about this. I think the message I'm getting loud and clear from the conversations I've had with Pauline is place is working really well for the 6 places. There might be some tweaks to make there, but they're minor adjustments. We had a conversation about the point that you made about the statutory role of an elected member in children's, where does that fit into this, as well as the role that Pauline's representing today from a director of children's services perspective. So I think we had quite a few conversations, didn't we, around how this could work and how it could work very differently.
Very, very quickly, and that's not to take anything away from what you're just saying about the amount. I'm just saying, joining all those things up. Yeah. But your point on transition. So, do we have a policy ICS-wide on transition, not just for mental health, because transition is actually the other. Don't answer the question. I don't think we necessarily have, but that's the sort of thing I think that we're talking.
And that's
about
what we're developing.
There's new nice guidance, isn't there, on transition, and there's a national framework for transition. In process at the moment, but it's nothing new, Stephen. We've known it for years.
No, but we have a template which, when we get to it, Chair, on end of life care, that when you see that, you will be blown away by what they have done in that field.
But that's
the permission to do it now over the last 12 to 18 months. So it's the same sort of place I think we're trying to get to. But anyway.
And that's why we're looking at those scales of when is it beneficial to all or beneficial to one. Particularly for children who live in one place and go to school in another, there are times when consistencies are really important across places, not just that place.
Julia.
So, Karina, thank you for what you just said, because I think what I just want us to pause for a moment and remind ourselves of is that Pauline's calling for something very different, and it's really encouraging to hear that there'll be a continuing conversation with Pauline and the other DCSs and Karina and Peter to think about what that architecture might need to look like. I feel we've set something here today about putting children and young people almost as your North Star. We've got health inequalities. Yeah, we can have more than one North Star. It needs, what we need is not to think about does it fit anywhere else, but how can it have almost primacy in a sense of the conversation we've had today. So I would really be encouraged if we were to look at what needs to happen and what do we need to let go of in some of those things that are happening in the space of the ICS that don't need to happen. So I think the DCSs need to lead this conversation, and that's what we need to come back with.
Yeah.
Sarah.
Yeah, you read my mind. I think probably the comment I was going to make was one of the most powerful things I think we heard Pauline set out was trust the places to know how and when to escalate. So for me, this is back to this point. Is actually what Stephen set out is, I want to know how we actually do this. How do we get that system leadership kind of coming through from the DCSs to really put this on the agenda? And I suppose my plea was that we didn't sort of start defining how that needs to look, and we do trust our DCS colleagues. I think I think you've earned the kind of right to take that on. I feel like there's trust in you as a collective. And actually, just to make the point, I work with Martin Kelly really closely in York. We have an excellent group of DCSs actually that we should be really proud of and nurture and able to work in this leadership space. So I just wanted to sort of say that really and support you.
I suppose I'd want to come back in there, Chair, in terms of I think maybe some of the starting places. We've moved along in our model, and we have a Start Well board and we have a date in the diary. But again, it's been a meeting DCSs have been invited to and done to. And I think to make some of that work, I'm just laying it all out here, I think we probably need, maybe with some of Karina and Pete's help, to think about how that would actually really function, because asking yet another DCS to come along to a meeting about health in the backdrop of what I've just described, I'll turn up. But I'm just worried about what that commitment is by other DCS.
Pete and I discussed that yesterday, Pauline, about how it's this first one. So I think it's just what's the art of the possible at that first one? How will we? And I couldn't disagree with you.
And I think it's the art of the possible that I think we have to signal. I will go away and signal and see who I can get there, that it will be something different from the last 18 months.
It has to be, doesn't it? So,
Thank you.
So there's some birthing pains, but I think it's been really good that all of that is also on the table for what we now do. Because I think it's just been 2 tracks. Let's now try and make it all one system.
Thank you very much indeed for that. And looking at timing, to finish on time, I think I can now hand back to the chair, rather than me as co-chair. First of all, before I do, because that would then be closing remarks from Sue, can I thank you very much? It's a real feeling of seat of power sat here, actually, sort of co-chair. But thanks very much for the debate this afternoon. I think it's been really good, really positive. And can I personally wish you all the very best for Christmas, before I'm sure Sue will be doing, because I realise as I'm enjoying myself over Christmas, I'll be thinking of many people around this table that will be, I'm certainly not struggling, but under pressure through the services and things, and that's always in the back of our minds, I think, particularly as elected members. So thank you very much. Sue, I'll pass back to you now as Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much
remarks.
indeed, Jonathan. A lovely change for you to chair instead of me. I think we'll make that a permanent arrangement. What a great meeting. You know, these are relatively new, these meetings, aren't they? This is our third time round. What's it going to be like? We haven't got as many local authority people as I thought we might. You know, always worry, is everything going to be okay? But what an absolutely terrific meeting. So well done all. And how interesting that things start to stitch together, don't they? You know, Charlie's terrific piece about the futures work that we're going to embark on. Well, actually, doesn't that just stitch well into the work that we've been talking about today? And I hope for all those of you involved in the delivery of children's services, you get the feeling that there is now an energy behind what we're seeking to do. And potentially that feels very different. So thank you all very much indeed for your contributions. Of course, I'm wishing you all a very happy Christmas and good health and happiness in 2024. We will next meet on Wednesday, the 20th of March. And as best I know, that's in this very room. So we'll be here again on the 20th of March. In the meantime, thank you all very much indeed and good afternoon.